Merry meet. Welcome to Witchy Wednesday here at Ariel's Corner. I hope you're doing great today. This is Ariel Gatoga. We're streaming live on YouTube and on Twitch. Moderating today on YouTube is the lovely Honey Paw, and moderating on Twitch is the lovely Shirley. Thank you so much, moderators. And thank you to everybody for joining us today for some witchiness. And we're going to do some binding spells today. So yay binding. Love a good little hexy day. But we'll do it in a very safe way, I promise. Let's see. What was I going to say? Oh, yeah. We had a question about the astral projection. I've had a couple questions about astral projection. I had an email this morning. Somebody was kind of, I don't know what their deal was, but they were annoyed that I had posts about angels, and they wanted to know why all the astral projection classes weren't up. So they're not up because they're not finished yet, and we do them every Thursday, and just like I said, every Thursday. So you can find the tomorrow at 10:15 a.m. if you want to be live. We'll be doing the course live, and then on Friday I will upload that lesson, both the handout and the lecture, to your lesson page. Okay? So, and I'm sorry you don't like my posts on angels. I don't only post on angels, but you can always just disregard the posts you don't like. So there you have it. Let's see. We have a shop at arielscornershop.com, arielscornershop.com. We have all kinds of merchandise there, so we make a small commission off of each and every sale. It's just a fun, easy way to give us some support. If you're going to be doing some shopping, you can click one of our links first, and then we get a little commission off of whatever you buy from Amazon or Etsy, depending on the link you're pressing. It doesn't have to be the specific item that's linked in there, but just by pressing one of our links, then whatever your shopping session that day is, we get a little commission. So it's just a fun way to give us a little support. If you would like to give us an actual donation, you can do that by going using a super sticker or super chat if you're watching live, or if you're watching on a restream, you could use a super thanks. You could also send a donation to paypal.me/Ariel Gatoga. paypal.me/Ariel Gatoga. Oh, let's see. We have a new, for those of you that are into the Psalm magic, we have Psalm 119 finally got put up today. It's been a long time in the making, and that's a long video. It's almost 2 hours long, but I time-stamped it all. So if you're working the magic of Psalm 119, like in my booklet on Psalm 119, you can just use the timestamps to go right to the sections you need, so you don't have to listen to the whole thing or hunt through it. Well, I guess that's about it on announcements. Let's get going with our binding spells today. So I was watching on our Facebook group, and we had some talk about somebody wanted some freezer spell because of a person at work that was giving her some issues, or him some issues. I can't remember the gender of the person. And so we'll do a little bit of that today too. But one of the comments, I just wanted to just put my 2 cents in. I'm not one of those rule of 3 people that you can't do anything. You do what you will, okay? But there was an idea that somebody got from some other source that if somebody's bothering you at work, you can do a spell so that they go away. And, you know, I understand that we want to protect ourselves, but is it really up to us to decide that somebody should lose their job or be barred from their work just because we're not getting along with them, even though we may think that they're the problem, right? How about if you're going to do anything like that, just binding them from bothering you, protecting yourself so it doesn't affect you? To me, that sounds a lot more along the lines of something that I'd want to do. I don't want to be responsible for somebody losing their job just because I'm not getting along with them, even though I think that they're bad or whatever. So that's just my 2 cents on that one. But do what you will. No judgment on my part. All right, so what I have is just a bunch of pieces of paper here. So the first thing I'm going to talk about with binding is that's one of the reasons why you have in your tools a witch's cord. The witch's cord is for binding. So one of the reasons why it's there for binding. Now, in the craft, binding isn't necessarily something that's a hex spell. You can bind things to you. You can bind yourself to a particular way of being. So if you want to bind yourself to being more productive in your job or something like that, you can do that. And so what you can do is you can take your cord, and I haven't done this very well. Let's just take these knots out. I'm sorry, I should have taken care of this before I started. I thought I did, but I guess I was just not with it. Let's just pretend I did that. So I already had this configured for, there we go. So let's say I wanted to bind if I wanted to do a positive binding spell for myself, where I wanted to bind my income to being, let's say I wanted, I don't know, you're doing a money spell for, I don't know, maybe you needed to double your income this year. It's really necessary that you double your income this year. So I want double my income or more. So I'm going to bind myself to having that minimum of twice as much of my income. So what I would do is I would say, well, for me, I want that to be, I'm going to do that as 10. I want that to be a happy outcome for myself. So I'm going to start with one knot, and I can have a spell that I'm speaking, or I can do it silently. And I might say double my income this year, double or more of my income this year each time I do a knot. Just as simple as that. I kind of like simple, but you can have a rhyme if you like. 1, 2, and I'm just going half and half each time so that it's somewhat even, but you don't need to. 3, double my income or more this year. 4, double my income or more this year. 5, double my income or more this year. 6, double my income or more this year. 7, double my income or more this year. 8, double my income or more this year. 9, double my income or more this year. 10 is the magic number of increase, so I like that for when I want to double my income, okay? So then I've got my witch's cord that's already been configured to double my income this year. So all I have to do is stop tangling it while I do this. Hang on. Stop that. That's not what I wanted. Stop it. Thank you. And I'm just going to roll this guy up. Like this. And I'm going to just hide it away until... Now, normally I would be doing this on a new moon. I'm just going to hide this away until the following new moon. And then my spell is complete and I can undo it. I don't need to, this is my regular witch's cord. So I'm not going to like throw it away or anything like that. I'm just going to undo the knots. After that new moon, the spell is complete. So that's an easy way, just using your witch's cord. Now, let's say, well, let's take this, like this person today. She wanted a freezer spell. So this is the basic freezer spell. So somebody's really being mean. Somebody's bullying you, let's say at work. Okay, well, that's not okay. They're not allowed to do that. So we're going to take their name and we're going to say, I bind you from harming me in any way. Okay? So you're not binding them completely, you're just binding them from harming you. And then we just take this and fold it up. Now you'll find all kinds of people with their own ways of doing this, and a lot of people will tell you need a certain gizmo or a certain thing. And I've been doing freezer spells since God made dirt. So what I do is I stick this in the bottom of some container. I put some sort of a weight on top of it, and then I fill this up with, not fill it up, but I cover it with water. Normally I use a plastic one instead of a glass one. I just didn't have anything in here to do this with. And I just stick it right in the freezer. Now, the only problem that I have with freezer spells like this is that now I get to babysit that. So that's going to be in my freezer. And when I thaw that out, then that undoes it. Because if that's the nature of a freezer spell. So some people say, no, it'll stay, even after you thaw it. And maybe that's true. But the nature of a freezer spell usually is that you must keep them in the freezer. So as long as I keep them in the freezer, they shouldn't be harming me. I like a different way of doing this myself. So but you can. That's a fine freezer spell, and you can do that. But here's one where you don't have to keep them in your freezer. This is the one I prefer. You have to use a tiny piece of paper for this one. Name. I bind you from harming me in any way. Now, I'm going to take a small piece of cord or string. I'm going to roll this little baby up. And I'm going to bind them. I'm going to bind that person from being able to harm me in any way. Oops. And then I'm just going to tie these two little ends together. I could have probably given myself a little more slack, but this will work. Just undo one. There we go. Give it another little knot here. I could have done this so much neater, but that's okay. All right. Now, I'm going to take this and stick it in a little ice tray like this. A little ice cube tray. And I'm going to fill this little section up with water. Okay. And I'm going to stick this in the freezer. Once it's completely frozen, so like overnight, I'm going to take it out like a little ice cube, and I'm going to take that ice cube and I'm going to bury it in the earth, somewhere out in my garden, wherever. I'm going to bury it in the earth, telling them that they are bound forever from being able to harm me as I bury them in the earth. Now, when that melts and it goes in the earth, I don't have to worry about it because they are bound by the earth as well. I don't have to worry about them thawing out. So they have immediately have been bound in the freezer, and then they are bound for eternity in the earth, because eventually both the cord and that paper will decompose and they will become part of the earth, and their power to harm me is gone forever. How simple and wonderful is that? My favorite. All right. Now, I know some people that do a lot of freezer spells, a lot of binding spells, and they've got people all in their freezer. They've got so many people in their freezer. And I don't mean this to sound like a judgment, because it's not, but if I were that way and I noticed that I had a bunch of my people in my freezer, I would think, where's my part in this, where I have to constantly put people in the freezer? How is that? How can I look at that as being something that I should be looking at myself? And that's where binding, I think, is at its most helpful, is to look at what we are willing to, what we're willing to put up with, maybe in other people, and where our boundaries are. So, for instance, if I always am binding people from being bullies, then I need to bind bullying from my aura so that there is no more bullying in my aura. So I bind all bullying from every part of my life. Now, I'm not going to put this in the freezer. I mean, you could do a freezer spell like I just did with that ice tray. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a real basic binding. Similar to what I just did with the freezer spell. I'm going to give myself a lot of cord, though. And I'm just going to think about every single time I've been bullied. Every time that I've been allowing people to... Oh, you got to start with some slack, Ariel. Start with some slack. Every time people have been able to... In fact, I think I'm going to do it like this. Every time people have been allowed to bully me in any way whatsoever, I'm binding that from my aura completely. And if you want to get worked up with this, you can. You can really get worked up. You can just feel, what does that feel like when people bully you? You know, if there's a specific bully in your life, they can be the representation of that. You're binding that behavior, but you're also binding it completely from your life, right? And then I just like to just continue binding, just tying these knots and without necessarily even thinking of a specific number like I did with my witch's cord. I'm just going to keep binding until I feel like it's complete, you know? And just thinking back, like, how many times have I been bullied in my life? How much of a pattern is this in my aura? How much do I allow that to happen on some level or another? And it's just over now. I'm binding that. I'm binding all the bullies, all of them. They can't hurt me anymore. There's no way that they can possibly hurt me because I'm binding them. I'm binding their behavior. I'm binding my aura, so that it doesn't even allow such things in. I'm binding it forever and ever and ever and ever. And then like we did with the ice cube, you just take this out and bury it. You just bury it. Now, what about if you've got somebody in your community? Maybe there's a racist. There's lots of those. I was going to say rapist. Maybe there's a rapist loose in your neighborhood or in your community. You don't have to put up with that. I bind this rapist from harming anyone. That's your right. That's not a negative thing. What's negative is that they're raping people, right? So we do the same thing. We just take this and we bind it away. Bind it up. Now you can use candles and you can use, all that stuff if you want, but I just find a piece of paper and a piece of string is all I need, or a freezer sometimes. But I'm just making it clear to the group mind that this rapist is bound. They have no power here. They are now bound. They cannot harm anyone. It's over. Oops, I didn't do that very well. Let's try that again. Let's watch what we're doing here, Ariel. There we go. Then I just bind this rapist completely from being able to harm anybody. I might have the newspaper clipping that I stick in here as sort of an object link. Now, obviously, if you're binding a particular person and you have some of their hair, or if you have a picture, you can include that in here if you need to, but usually their name is plenty. And again, I just keep binding. I just keep knotting it, thinking in terms of this rapist is not allowed. There's no more ability for this rapist to be able to harm anyone in this community. So you have the right to do that, and you have the right to bind them from being able to harm you. Right? You can do that. Now, sometimes when you're dealing with community kind of stuff and larger things, it's not as effective. So you make sure that you include yourself in that, because that's what's most effective, is that you and your household are being protected from whatever it is, right? So let's see if we have any questions on binding. You can use all kinds of tools. You can use all kinds of extra rituals, and a lot of people will give you suggestions. And as long as it makes you feel more witchy to do that, you by all means do it, but you don't need it. All you need is a piece of string and a piece of paper and a pen. That's all you need. It doesn't look like we have any questions. Okay, so I hope that this has been fun for you to see that you can bind people and you can bind behavior and you don't have to put up with it. But also remember that if you start binding people, that you are putting yourself out there, right? You're saying, I'm willing to be bound. When you bind another, you're willing to be bound. So I find for me, unless somebody is really hurting me, is really a danger, in which case, yeah, if I was doing that, I'd want to be bound too. I would rather bind that type of behavior in general from me, not just with a specific person, but in general. In general, I don't allow this. In general, I bind that kind of behavior from me, or this kind of behavior, or binding people from being able to be violent, or binding from people from being able to intrude on my home, that kind of thing. That's, to me, that's a lot more safe and effective than going and hexing individuals and binding individuals, because, then you're putting yourself out there as, okay, well, now I'm in there. I'm in there with sort of like a magical attack. So I'm willing to be attacked if somebody doesn't agree with me, which is kind of where I'm coming from with that point of view of, oh, if they're bothering you at work, you should make them go away. Oh, really? So you're going to let them lose their job because you're not getting along with them? Even if you think they're horrible? An easier, more efficient way of handling that is binding them from being able to harm you. Binding them from being able to harm you is not binding them in a way that's going to make them lose their job necessarily, unless that's the only way, that the universe can see that this gets resolved. But it's a more universal, more compassionate way of getting your needs met without trying to enforce your ego's will on a situation in a way that may not be really that good and may not be for the highest good of all. It's always better, in my experience, if you're going to be doing bindings, to bind the behavior rather than the person. Because usually, if the behavior's happening, this is not the first time. This is just probably one in a long string of places that you've been victimized by a certain type of behavior. So it's in your aura that you need to be doing the binding. You need to be binding, in other words, creating a psychic boundary, a very clear boundary as to what's tolerable and not tolerable in your life. That is very powerful, and that's what I would recommend that you focus the bulk of your bindings on. Now, there are times in our lives when there is a like with the rapist or with somebody that's maybe a stalker or something like that, where they're after you, where you really do need to bind them and name them, in which case I say go for it. And then I think that freezer spell is great because it immediately takes care of it right now. And then if you stick that ice cube in the ground and bury it, then not only are they bound from harming you immediately, but they're bound from harming you eternally. All right? Thank you so much for joining us today. Let's see. I didn't see a question. Hold on a second. Oh, what can we do if we live in an apartment in the city and don't have a yard or a park to bury things? Usually there's some place that you can find where you can bury something. Usually there's some place where you can go bury something. If not, get a potted plant, because it will still eventually, if you put it in the ground of the potted plant, it will still eventually disintegrate into the soil and it will be contained forever. That's the idea, is to have whatever materials you're using decompose in the ground. So if you can find out like a park or a graveyard, even anything like that, that's a great place to do that. But if you really can't, if you're in a city and there's absolutely no way that you can bury it, then it's time for a potted plant. That's what I would do. All right, hopefully that helped. Okay, well, thank you so much for being here today. I hope this was helpful. I know that the binding thing has come up again and again, so I hope that I was able to give you some ideas on how to bind more effectively. And I adore you, and I appreciate you, and thank you so much to the amazing moderators. Today we had Honey, Paw, and Shirley, and we will see you all hopefully tomorrow for the Astral Projection course. Much love and many, many blessings.